What it do, NMA crew? Hey man, listen, today I'm going to be talking about Ashita No Joe. I just finished Ashita No Joe 2 about a week ago, and I just want to talk about it. Eventually I'm going to make a much longer, more robust, and in-depth sort of thematic breakdown of it and all of its like moral implications, because I think it's a very important story, especially to me specifically as a really big combat sports fan. But Ashita No Joe is known as the first masterpiece in anime by some. I get it. I definitely get it. The 70s version is rough. It's rough around the edges, especially the pilot in the first few episodes. I mean, you're going to get total like directorial non sequiturs, like when somebody's in this shot and then they pan over and then they're in a completely different spot. You're going to have lips not matching up with the voices, like not even close. Like the lips move and then 5 seconds later the voice happens. You're going to be getting abject animation errors on a consistent basis, really tacky looking, like looping background shots moving. It can be very stuttery. You're not going to get like a fucking case study in fluidity of animation. The character models sort of range a lot. It's very awkward, and perhaps the most grating aspect of it is that the voice acting sounds like it was done in a cave. Like it was voice actors trying to voice act as poorly as possible while inside of a cave. And that sort of just persists throughout the entirety of season 1. But as it goes on, there starts to become more psychedelic imagery. Very, very experimental stuff, which is interesting because the medium was still in its infancy. When characters get hit, when these characters fight, they come out of a fight looking like a zombie. When they punch each other, their faces contort around the fists and blood splatters out with every punch, even though that's not really how boxing works at all. When a character gets rocked, random sound effects will play. It'll be like the freaking like stomach of a whale grumbling, or like a motor, or like sticks scraping against the floor. Like just random sounds will start playing that just sort of have this disorienting effect, and it'll be like all of these like psychedelic like tie-dye backgrounds, or weird bizarre color shifts that like are supposed to give the viewer the feeling of like, whoa, I just got concussed, I just got rocked, where am I? And there are some really cool, really strong visuals and auditory moments as well. I would say, especially in those earlier fights from the first season. The show starts off a little slow. Everybody's just kind of like obsessed with Joe for no great reason. He has a best friend character named Nishi that I was never too fond of the personality of until season 2, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But towards the second half of season 1, it really picks up. The wolf fight to the end is just absolutely spectacular, because these fights feel like fights. If you're a fight fan like myself, you know the agonizing feeling of waiting for a matchup that you don't know how it's going to go down for like weeks and weeks on end. You're just like waiting for it. You're seeing both the characters do like their different types of training camps to prepare, and you're just waiting, thinking of all the ways this clash might go down. And the beautiful thing about Joe is it's so brutal, it's so pugilistic that no matter what, even if you believe Joe's going to win, even if it's against some like jobber that clearly is not going to be the one to stop Joe, you're like, this dude's going to get fucked up in here. Like, this guy's going to go down several times, and he is not going to leave this fight quite the same person that he went into it with. And that's sort of the grander narrative of the story of Ashita No Joe, is that it's about a man's self-development as his brain and body slowly deteriorate from his method of doing so. And it's this really tragic, heart-wrenching dynamic of growth and decay simultaneously, and like ultimate futility and embrace of the transient. There's a million pretentious ways to say it, but it's just really dramatic and really fucking cool. And it's just so... It's goofy. It's goofy how many characters die in the show. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, when season 2 comes around and Leon Smiley dies, it's like, whatever. Like, that didn't really have any dramatic impact. We're just killing everyone at this point to reiterate points that we've already made several times over. We don't need to kill every single character after Joe boxes them. We get that that's part of the point, is that, you know, all of the people that he can relate to, all of the people who maybe could have helped him become a better person and understood him on a deeper level, he has to fucking fight and, like, either wound and cripple or kill altogether. And that's sort of, like, part of the tragedy of how his character is forced to grow. But at the same time, it can be overblown to a really goofy extent. I hear people call this the most realistic sports anime or the most realistic boxing anime more commonly. That's fucking ridiculous. I mean, he's uppercutting people out of the ring. There's a guy doing a Blanca ball and throwing kicks at him in the ring. You got Carlos Rivera using his signature elbow move while they have like replay, and nobody's ever noticed the fact that he's elbowing everybody. You have Jose patting Joe's shoulders and leaving a giant, perfectly hand-shaped bruise. Like, this is ridiculous. This is not the most true-to-life boxing anime, but I get what people are saying when they say that, because they're referring to its focus on the more human aspects of the sport, not just the competitive aspect, but how it affects these boxers as people, as humans, and a lot of the lesser talked about things. Weight cutting is an enormous aspect of combat sports that the layman just simply doesn't know about. And weight cutting is actually one of the true villains of this series. One of the true culprits behind the copious amounts of death in this series is that people are doing these absolutely excessive, ridiculous weight cuts. And that is a thing that really happens. They really starve and dehydrate their brain. It makes them easier to knock out. It makes them so that they can't recover as well. All to just get an advantage in this game. Or in Rikishi's case, for example, he actually wanted to have a disadvantage so that he could know for a fact he's beating Joe fair and square, because that's just his personality as the ultimate professional and as the ultimate competitor, which meshes with Joe so well, as Joe is just not as much the ultimate competitor as he just refuses to lose. Like, Rikishi's all about winning, conquering, conquest, making a legacy for himself, being a professional, winning, besting people in combat, growing himself, developing. Joe's about not losing, and he's very reactionary. Joe's somebody who doesn't really have a purpose in his life until boxing is sort of forced onto him. And the only thing that really gets him going is when Rikiishi beats his ass, because he's like, no, I can't take that. I can't handle that. Because Joe has a lot of pride, despite not really having a huge identity. He's an orphan. He barely has a name. I mean, his name's Joe. I mean, how dumb is that? Am I right? That's the real tragedy of this show. Yeah, I went there. But Joe is he's a bit of a slate. He's a bit of a blank slate that just refuses to be put down by society or any individuals anymore. He's just angry and he wants to fight. He doesn't really want to get anywhere else. He doesn't usually have these longer term goals. He's just so focused on what's in front of him, and that's what makes him a great boxer. But also it's his ultimate undoing due to the fact that he's so focused on that he fails to play the long game and look after his body. So you get into, I guess I'll just really quick talk about the difference between season 1 and season 2. Season 1, really rough animation, but some really cool psychedelic cuts. Season 2 turns it into the most beautiful 80s anime ever, because there's an 11-year gap between the two seasons, and they spent a ton of time in production. Season 2 is downright gorgeous, and sometimes it can be kind of choppy, especially during the weaker arcs. It's definitely not a perfect production, which I'll get into a little bit more later, but it starts off making you think it's going to be a lot worse than season 1, because it focuses on Joe's arc that's supposed to sort of embellish or communicate just how stubborn and averse to character development he is, by showing his foolhardy, just what would you say, headstrong mentality of I'm going to keep getting back in there even though my body is denying it and shutting down. I don't have a problem. I can hit people in the head. It doesn't matter. And while he's doing that, you need to focus a little bit more on the B plots to keep stuff interesting, because while you're communicating that point about Joe's inability to grow by doing the same things over and over again, it gets dramatically stale and it gets predictable. So you have to kind of use those B plots to shore things up. But the first season did not do a great job developing the side characters of this show. A lot of them weren't that interesting. Nishi's entire personality was just being obsessed with Joe. The female characters in the show, this show cares so little about the female characters that they just drew them all the same. You can't tell me Noriko is not just, oh my god, what's her name? The main girl, Yoko with a haircut. Bro, that's the same shit. Those characters aren't really interesting. Nishi's not really interesting. Denpei is a weird one. Denpei is a very interesting character, but I would say a lot of his more intriguing development happens in season 2. And that's sort of the common theme here. A lot of the side characters get really interesting development in that second season. alongside Joe. And I think that's the main advantage the second season has over the first one, besides the consistent animation, because unfortunately it does get a little bit less experimental. Not to say that those elements are completely gone from the second season, but these fights in the second season are just absolutely nothing short of incredible. Voice acting takes a hit, though. Voice acting takes a hit. Soundtrack takes a hit because the first season soundtrack is nothing short of fucking iconic. It is unforgettable. One of the best soundtracks in anime history, which is insane to say about a show that's from the fucking early 70s. But season 2 has this like vintage 80s soundtrack that is really like pretty cool, but at the same time it doesn't really mesh with the show very well at all. The openings lose like a lot of their muster. I really wish they could have played the first opening in that final scene of the show in that fucking epic conclusion, but they played Midnight Blues. Da-na-na-na-na. Whatever. I just have so much to say about the show that it's kind of like word vomit, but I'm getting all over the place. So I'm just going to, I'm not even going to really like have that much of a direction with this one, but season 1, I would say, was a show that had fantastic moments, fantastic fights, a lot of potential, and a few extremely good character arcs, but overall a very unbalanced cast. Season 2 did a lot in terms of balancing that cast out. However, I would say it's more unbalanced on an episode-to-episode basis. The arcs in Season 2 are either amazing or they're mediocre. And there's really not that much of an in-between. There's like 20 episodes of Season 2 that are like, and then there's 30 episodes that are like the best anime I've ever fucking seen in my life. The Carlos arc, best thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm going to get a lot of flack for this. Or the Jose arc. The Jose arc is obviously my favorite. If it's not your favorite arc, you're tripping. Unless you like the Rikiishi arc that much. I can totally respect that. But Carlos arc, great. Rikiishi arc, great. That was season 1. But the Rikiishi arc, great. Carlos, great. Jose, great. Kim, amazing. I might get some flack for that one. Everybody talks, oh, Joe's weight cut is so stupid. No. It's the perfect metaphor for his strained growth as a person. As he grows as a young man into his new body, he's stopping himself from going through that natural process of maturation for the sake of taking this boxing match against some 30-year-old who's so traumatized that he can't see blood, or else he like shuts down like a robot and starts attacking people without being able to remember it. It's really is a beautiful thing. And people are like, oh, well, why does the weight cutting problem go away? Well, there's multiple reasons. Because that's the point where the show should focus on it the most, because it's when it's at its most thematically relevant. Joe didn't want to admit that he had a problem, so he wasn't telling it to Denpei, who's the person who can actually put him on a regimen that can help him start cutting weight more healthily from more time out. And then also, did you guys not watch the scene? The scene where he talks to Kim? He's not getting as out of shape in the off season anymore. Kim teaches him how to be less hungry, how to be more disciplined, even though his greatest strength is still being wild. It's sort of a thing that they have to walk back after the Kim fight when Yoko's like, he's losing his edge. He's not the wild man anymore that has a chance to just like fucking knock Carlos out for no reason. Kim teaches him to be more not respectful of the sport, but he teaches him that it's more possible to have more of a handle on it. Because when Kim talks about his time in the Korean War with this absolutely hauntingly beautiful 80s depiction of the fucking tragedy of war, oh my god, like Barefoot Gen tier shit, so good. Definitely inspired by Barefoot Gen for sure. But like when you see this this really heartfelt flashback, you start to understand and put into perspective this whole boxing thing, because while the show does such a good job at making boxing feel serious, making it feel like the biggest deal in the world, every time Joe goes into a fight, he's not going to leave the same. People die. This stuff happens. That happens in real life boxing. People don't realize it. It's not that uncommon. It really is not that uncommon. I'm more of an MMA fan where it is it's never happened in the UFC. I don't know of any cases of MMA fighters dying, but like in boxing, like this shit happens. Straight up. It happens. At the highest level it can happen. Especially in the 70s and 80s, but it didn't go away. It's still a thing to this day. And that is a very harsh truth, because, there's a lot of almost class consciousness to this show, because you have Yoko, who's pulling all the strings and at times even emotionally manipulating Joe into keeping boxing. And as she falls in love with him, she realizes, like, she's the one controlling him from the sidelines because he's so reactionary and he feels so powerless. He has really not that big of a sense of self-worth. It's weird because he has such a raging ego, but at the same time, he's not very good to himself, I guess I would say. And Yoko is the one who has all the money to just do whatever she wants to him, regardless of how he feels about it. He's super resistant at first. He hates her. He hates the fact that her sheer nature as somebody born rich sort of compromises her ability to engage in good faith with poor folks such as himself. But she just kind of like throws enough money at him to where that has to go away over time. And she sort of buys her way into this guy's life as she destroys it out of a lack of knowledge for what boxing does, because she doesn't really care about it the way that a Denpei does. But Denpei doesn't have the same money, and Denpei is also emotionally compromised when coaching Joe because of the fatherly relationship he fosters with him. Denpei is somebody who has thrown his life away, essentially. He missed out on his dream after focusing on his career for so long and is now a strung-out alcoholic on the streets whose last hope in life is to vicariously win a world title through Joe. But there's a breaking point during the Rikiishi fight where he thinks Joe is like severely injured, where he yells, "Somebody help my boy. Why won't they help my boy?" Or something along those lines. And it's like, whoa, holy shit, that's a new level. He's always been somewhat protective, but he's mostly been like a stern, older mentor character with father figure-like qualities. That's not a thing a lot of people don't realize. Highest level boxers, Floyd Mayweather, current world champions, Teofimo Lopez, I'm not sure, there are definitely other ones. Their main trainer is their literal father, or it is essentially their father figure. You got to keep in mind, a lot of boxers come from low income areas, just because it's like such a high risk sport. Like, who would want to put their health on the line like that unless they really thought it was their only option to escape poverty, which is sort of another layer to the class aspect of this story. It's a lot of these people don't have great home lives. They don't have super involved parents. And they go to a gym and sort of take on their coach as their father figure. And it's very toxic and interesting relationship I haven't seen explored many times in media, because they're simultaneously trying to be a drill sergeant that makes this kid into a machine and like an absolute wrecker. But at the same time, they're responsible for supplying them with a certain amount of emotional validation. And they kind of have to like balance that out. What Denpei does in season 2, while Yoko becomes more and more focused on making Joe into a champion, Denpei sort of falters. He sort of starts like hiding things from Joe. He starts being like, "Hey Joe, we're gonna throw in the towel. Hey Joe, you really need to like consider like like not doing this." But then when push comes to shove and he has to confront the idea that he might be marching Joe into imminent death because he's suffering from punch drunk syndrome. He's like, no, Joe doesn't have it. No, Joe doesn't have it. And he convinces himself that Joe doesn't have it and that everything's fine. And he just spends a little bit more time with Joe before he inevitably passes away. It is a tragic dynamic. And it's interesting because Nishi, the one who has to quit boxing, is the one who ends up with the intelligent and beautiful wife and ostensibly a happy life along commitment with her afterwards, while Joe ends up dying in the ring. Joe ends up dying in the ring, but he dies with a smile on his face, and that's not for nothing. It is an interesting dilemma about, what you want out of life, what you want out of your youth. And in a lot of ways, you feel like Joe was manipulated by Yoko. He was manipulated by his upbringing as a poor orphan. He was manipulated into becoming a boxer, but at the same time, you can't deny that there are some people who would choose this. There are some people who want to put it all on the line there. Like boxing, obviously, all the talk of how it might be a bit of an immoral practice, it's two consenting adults at the end of the day. So the only true evil of it comes from coercing adults into making those decisions against their own will. And then you could evidence that by saying like, well, you see only poor people go into boxing for the most part, or only poor people to really take it that far. So clearly these people are having a compromised ability to decline the offer of boxing, I guess this would be a bad way to put it. I don't know how to word it, but I'm sure you guys can hopefully understand what I mean. Boxing is a tricky fucking game. It's really, really brutal. And it's a lifestyle. It's crazy because it's like, I got into MMA, I got into watching fights to see people push themselves to their limits, just like see the absolute limit of humanity, how far people are willing to go for the glory. But, it's obviously really bad when it feels like people were forced into that position. The appeal of it is like, how far are people willing to push themselves? And that's what I always found amazing about boxing and fighting sport and, the indomitable human spirit. A lot of commentary here about how the indomitable human spirit is indomitable in some manners. Yeah, in some ways, yes, but ultimately transient. It can't last forever. And it's just it's so tragic. It's so sad. The last thing I want to talk about here, I could talk about this for literally like 4 hours. I swear to God, I'm not just saying that. I could talk about this show for so long. I have a million things to say. I'm going to wrap it up by talking about... Actually, I kind of want to talk about the directing and a few of the cons. All right. A few of the cons, let's just get them out of the way. The triple takes. Way overdone, especially during some of the weaker arcs in season 2. I've noticed that when the show is narratively weaker, there also seems to be a little bit less emphasis put into making the directing engaging. This is further exacerbated by the fact that a lot of those weaker arcs happen to coincide with more foreign characters, just because that just happens to be the time in the story where it's just like pure coincidence. The foreign characters all speak English. They don't actually speak their native languages, but none of the English voice actors actually know how to speak it very well. It's almost entirely a bunch of Japanese guys trying to do English voices, but for some reason they have no emotion. They talk extremely quietly during very intense scenes on a consistent basis, and it's really cringy to hear them try to utter out phrases that you can barely piece together as English, given being like an actual native speaker. It's really awkward. It really kills the tone. I usually think like the English thing is kind of funny and it adds to the charm of a series, but in this case where it's such a hyper dramatic, serious, gritty show, it doesn't work at all, and it genuinely takes away from the presentation of those more dramatic scenes, even in the better arcs, especially when in tandem with the fact that, the quality of the voice acting takes a big jump up in season 2. However, the choice in voice actors kind of falls off. Like, Nishi doesn't sound like he looks anymore. Denpei, I think, changed his voice. Like, almost like half the fucking cast changed his voice actors, and it's just like, what we doing here? What we doing here? I would also say the comedic relief gets a little bit more charming in season 2. That is one thing I would say about season 2 over season 1. But I mean, it's just so complicated. There's so many like pushes and pulls and gives and takes, because season 1 is more atmospheric, but season 2 moves faster. It's like there's a lot of things. There are many things that are interesting about it, but I like Carlos because Carlos is a perfectionist. He's the perfect man. He's a Floyd Mayweather. This show predicted Floyd Mayweather before he came out. He's like the greatest boxer ever. He's a bantamweight, and he greatly prioritizes his health and not fucking with memory loss. Not fucking with getting punch drunk, not fucking with CTE. And Joe sort of like brings that out of him where it's like, listen, motherfucker, you can't fight me without taking damage. Like you can't, I won't let you. I will throw my will into yours until I die just to break you. Because that's the type of person Joe is. Joe won't lose. He'll die or he'll win. You know what I mean? And that's sort of like ultimately the life he chose. Rivera's interesting. Not Rivera. Mendoza. I'm sorry, it's like late as hell. Mendoza is interesting because not only is he this perfectionist, he's also kind of racist. And this is something that people don't realize because, yeah, he's cool. Yeah, he's sportsmanlike. Yeah, he's nice. He's a dope guy. His fights are incredible. My favorite fights in anime. Spectacular. It's not an accident that he's low-key racist. And I really want to talk about that in my actual video talking about this and how he sort of represents a view on potential and your body and even like your genetics in like an epigenetic sense about like being perfect and being superior and competition through that lens. And I don't think it's like, oh, this guy's just boxing Hitler. I think it's an interesting perspective because at the end of the day, yeah, he's racist. Bro, hell, people in the 70s were racist. A lot of people in the 70s were racist, okay? This guy's a good family man, okay? He's a good family man. Jose Mendoza is a good guy to everybody except Joe, who he calls a bunch of, like, pseudo anti-Asian slurs. So it's interesting. He's not one note. They end up respecting each other in the end, but it's like, nah, we can't just let fly, like, what Jose said. Like, that was fucked up. So, yeah. Just more stuff I want to mention in there. There's a lot of pushes and pulls. I ultimately think season 2 was better, especially because it has my favorite anime fights in anime history. Absolute insanity. The Rikiishi fight is like one of the greatest moments in anime history. The Mendoza fight is one of the greatest moments in anime history, but there's just overall too many really weak arcs in the show. The Leon arc, the Haramaru arc, the after Rikiishi fight arc is probably the worst offender by far. That just drag it down to where I couldn't quite put it among my favorites list, but it is at the very top of my eights, which I consider to be absolute classic anime. Ashita No Joe is worth the watch. Ashita No Joe is worth all the praise that it gets. It is a beautiful story that needed to be told that I personally deeply appreciate in spite of its flaws, and I'll never forget it. I'll be watching Ashita No Joe AMVs till the day I die. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Anime Guru out.